Let's dance and sing and make good cheer. Christmas comes but once a year. John Taylor, Royalist poet. Now, I was not planning on doing a Christmas video. I'm a bit of a humbug, not gonna lie. But somebody forced my hand. This video, in case you may or may not have noticed, is sponsored by said person. It's a person I probably shouldn't refuse, ever. More on him later. Christmas in the 17th century is full of conflict. You see a time period where religion and day-to-day society, they start to collide. Christmas is traditionally celebrated as a time of merriment. Even before the 17th century, a lot of the birds present in the 12 Days of Christmas, those would end up on the dinner plate. Reason being, there was fasting before Christmas. There was that bit of religious observance. And then you'd have a big party. Turkey started to become a traditional Christmas fare in the late 1500s. By the early 17th century, you start seeing recipes involving turkey. People were given a Christmas bonus in turkey. Now, to us in the United States, turkey's not really exotic. At one point, Ben Franklin wanted to make the turkey our national symbol. Quite honestly, I kind of like the turkey. I'm on Ben Franklin's side. Turkey would be on the same table as, let's say, a peacock. I mean, this is the sort of exotic food that we're talking about when it comes to at least the upper class in England at the time. You'd also see things like boar's head. A lot of these traditions revolve around food. Max Miller just did an excellent video on some of the food of Christmas during the late medieval period into the Renaissance. Definitely worth checking out. But it was fun. It was fun. It was a good time. You would spend time with your family and friends. You might play football. You might do things like that. There was gift giving. There was a certain degree of decorating. There was caroling. And there might be a good bit of wassailing. And then the English Civil War happens. To conclude, I'll tell you news. That's right, Christmas was killed at Naseby fight. Charity was slain at the same time. Jack tell truth too, a friend of mine. Likewise then did die roast beef and shred pie, pig, goose, and capon no quarter found. Yet let's be content, and the times lament. You see the world turned upside down. There's some who have argued that, maybe the parliamentarians were not completely against Christmas. Yeah, they very much were. I mean, the fun parts of Christmas. In June 1647, Parliament banned the feast days of Christmas, Easter, and Whitsun. Pentecost. It's the 7th Sunday after Easter. It would have been an early summer holiday. It would have been welcoming in the summer. Soldiers would patrol the streets of London and would take food that was being cooked for Christmas. Luckily, in 1660, King Charles II restores the monarchy as well as Christmas. Meanwhile, in the colonies, in December 25th, 1621, William Bradford, governor of the Plymouth colony, banned Christmas. The first Christmas at the Plymouth colony had been spent working because they had just arrived. They needed to get the colony established. They needed to get off the Mayflower. They didn't really have time to even think about Christmas. A second wave of colonists arrived. Many of them were not religious. The Pilgrims were Puritan radicals. They would be a little bit more extreme than, let's say, Oliver Cromwell. Even though the Puritans were growing in strength in England at that time, they were still feeling persecuted. The second wave of colonists arrives. They wanted to celebrate Christmas. William Bradford was treating Christmas like any other day. So you wake up, you work. You don't get a break, you're working. The new colonists were like, it's against our conscience to work on Christmas. Bradford told them, I mean, since it's your conscience, I can respect that. You don't have to work. But hopefully soon you will be better informed. He and the other pilgrims, they leave. They go about doing their work. They come back and they find the colonists were playing ball. So the William Bradford, took all their sports equipment and confined them to their homes. In 1659, Christmas gets banned for the Massachusetts Bay Colony. You would be fined 5 shillings if you were caught celebrating. And that's about 48 bucks today. Doesn't seem like a lot, but come on, it's Christmas. The ban would be repealed in 1681 as a way to bring the laws of Massachusetts up to the rest of the colonies. Christmas would still be largely ignored until the 19th century. So, I talked about all the happiness and revelry. So what really was getting under the Puritan skin? Well, many of the Puritan ministers started the internet meme that we see every year around this time, where, well, this is a pagan holiday that, except they didn't feel like the Christians stole it, they felt like the pagans were corrupting Christianity. That was one point. Another one was just how much fun people would have. Carolers, I'm pretty sure you've heard the Christmas Carol where there's the line, "Bring me some figgy pudding." Yes, they would actually go so far as to break into your house and take that figgy pudding if you refused to give them some. It was not just the happy little family down the street walking around with their kids singing carols. No, these were people that would go so far as to break into your home and steal from you. There was public drunkenness, public lewdness. Among one of the festivities at the time is something that's actually still celebrated in the Philadelphia area of Pennsylvania. It's called mumming. Those who do not know what mumming is, it's a tradition that existed in the 17th century and even before, where people would cross-dress, they might wear fancy costumes. You might, if you couldn't afford a fancy costume, you just switch clothes with your wife. And you and your wife would both go and have a great time about the town. At best, it was a bunch of drunks singing and having a good time. At worst, it was couples having a good time, possibly robbing people. Some of the Puritan ministers noted that if you were wearing different clothing, you had a better chance of being able to break into somebody's house. In 1679 in Salem, 4 men broke into the house of 72-year-old John Rowden. John Rowden was known for making perry. It's a liquor made from fermented pears. Apparently it was really good, and these 4 men are like, look, we want to celebrate Christmas, give us your perry. John Rowden, he's like, no, you can't have this. You're not supposed to celebrate Christmas. Didn't stop them. They stole the Perry, as well as some personal property other than the Perry, apparently. Yeah, I mean, Christmas was a little more lively than how we celebrate today. I mean, except on Black Friday, I guess. There might be some comparison there. In 1687, Increase Mather spoke of those who celebrate Christmas. They are consumed in compotations, in interludes, in at playing cards, in revellings, in excess of wine, in mad mirth. Quite honestly, what he describes sounds fun. And many people would listen to this and they go, well, that sounds like a good time. Where do I sign up? Like, and this is in the time period as well. We're not talking present day. We're talking in the time period. People would hear that. You know, it actually does sound like a good time. Of course, Massachusetts was not the only colony at the time. We also had Pennsylvania. Quakers did not celebrate Christmas. They did not believe any day was any better than any others. But they had religious freedom in Pennsylvania. The Anabaptists, many of them German, Swiss, they were more reserved than the English, but they did celebrate. They had small gifts, visiting, relaxing, singing, big meals. Didn't really decorate. Keep in mind, Anabaptists, that's Amish Mennonites today, many of them celebrate the same way. But they do celebrate. Around 1700 arrived other Swiss and German immigrants. They brought with them such traditions as Belsnickel. Belsnickel is... trying to think the best way to describe him to those of you who are not familiar with Pennsylvania German traditions or German traditions in that matter. He's kind of like Mountain Man Santa. I mean, he's dressed in furs. He looks dirty. Sometimes he carries a switch with him. And he would make children prove that they had been good that year. It might be reading a Bible verse. It might be telling him what they learned in school. And then they'd get a small gift. Or they'd get smacked with a switch. One or the other. Another character which came along, which I'm pretty sure the Puritans would not have been very pleased with, was a certain figure named Krampus. Which is the sponsor of today's video, Susquehanna Valley Krampus. If you want him for events, you need to get in touch with him, preferably a few months before this time of year. Krampus is actually one of the admins in the Crew of the Fancy group. So, if you mess up, you don't get the band hammer, you get the switch. And instead of getting banned, you get put in a basket and carried away. So, of course, this is a pirate channel. I already covered Pennsylvania, a little bit of the 17th century in other parts. Most of you are here to learn about the pirates. So how did pirates celebrate Christmas? Well, let's look at how the Navy celebrated Christmas. A good source, especially if it involves food, a nice starting source, someplace to get you started, to have a lot of good information up front, is the Pirate Surgeon's Journal by Raphael Mission. It's an excellent site. He updates it every so often. There's a ton of great information. Let's start with the Navy. How did the Navy celebrate Christmas? Pretty much the way you'd expect. There was pudding. Now, Christmas pudding, I should have probably mentioned this earlier. It's not what you think of as pudding here in America. We think of pudding as, usually we think of it as either a packet that you get at the grocery store, or like you buy a tub of it at the grocery store. That is not the pudding we're talking about. We're talking about things like bread pudding, which is something that's baked. A lot of these puddings were boiled. If you're on a ship, more likely your pudding would be boiled. It's more of a cake consistency. I made some last year. I loved it. My son loved it. Everybody else was perplexed by it. Pudding was oftentimes, it would be served on a Sunday or a special occasion. In this case, Christmas. It would be full of sweetmeats. When I say sweetmeats, I'm not talking about actual meat. I'm talking about things like raisins, currants, things like that. Dried fruit. Of course, you might get more of a rum ration. If your ship had enough stores, you might get a bigger meal than what you normally get. If you were near land, you might actually get fresher food. A lot of the accounts reference firing guns, sounding of horns. There might be a religious component to it. You might hear Mass. Overall, you would still have to work, but you might not have to work as long or as hard as a normal day. That is, if your ship could afford it. If your ship could not, you might just be like any other day. Might get a little bit more of your alcohol ration. With pirates, you're looking at the same sort of thing. You might have a bigger meal than usual. You might have to work less, if you worked at all. And, of course, their alcohol stores would be a lot more freely available than the Navy ones. You would have more options for punch. There'd be different wines. I know I've covered punch before in some of the shorts, but punch would basically be just about any liquor you had on hand. Possibly you might throw some wine into it, or cider, and fruit juices of some kind. If you had sugar, spices. There's quite a few recipes floating around. When I make mine, I usually do a citrus, water, rum, and I usually top it off with a little bit of nutmeg. Pirates throughout the Golden Age, that's typically how they celebrated. I mean, we're from the Buccaneer period onward, that's typical. It would be like the Navy celebration, but with a lot more food and a lot more fun. If they had the stores for it. If they did not, well, they might drink a little more. Which brings us to one of my favorite accounts, because it's actually what got me into this. It's Pierre-Jean-Baptiste Labat, the French missionary who, I compare him a lot to Andrew Zimmern because he's traveling around the Caribbean talking about food most of the time. Pierre-Jean-Baptiste Labat describes a buccaneer / filibuster Christmas. I started to edit and I realized I wanted to actually have Labat's full account in this video. So, let's actually hear it. It's translated, of course, into English. At this point in time, Labat had settled down on a plantation. At the request of another priest, they wanted to have a buccaneer party. Now, Labat had spent time among the buccaneers and filibusters, so what he's describing is anachronistic, but at the same time, very close to how a party for a buccaneer would have been if they had the means to do so. A kokon bucan is held in the forest. On these occasions, everyone must pretend to be buccaneers, who cook their pig and amuse themselves in much the same way when they wish to take a holiday. One of the differences between my bucan and that of the buccaneers is that they cook a sanglier, a wild boar, while I have to be contented with a tame pig. So I had a pig killed and cleaned the evening before, and I also had a place cleared in the woods, some 1,500 paces from our house, on the bank of the river. Here I had a large ajupa built. An ajupa is a hut made of light poles covered with balisier and kakibu leaves to keep out the rain. I sent the pig and other things I'd prepared to the ajupa at daybreak, and most important of all, the wine to be cooled in the river. I should note here, a great way if you don't have refrigeration to cool, like let's say wine, keep it in the bottle, make sure everything's sealed up, and you put it in running water. That running water moving over it can help cool it quite a bit. I've actually done that with vodka before. When all the guests had arrived, we walked to the bucan and arrived there at about 9 a.m. The first thing to be done on these occasions is for everyone to set to work. The laziest had to make 2 broquettes, wooden skewers, for each buccaneer. For this purpose, they cut sticks as thick as one's finger, which are then barked and smoothed. One bucan should have 2 prongs, while the other has but a point. The other guests made the broquette. This is a grill on which the whole pig has to be cooked. To make the bucan, 4 forked sticks, about 4 feet long and as thick as your arm, are driven into the ground to form an oblong structure about 4 feet long by 3 feet wide. The cross pieces of wood are placed in the forks of those sticks. On these, one arranges the grill, which is made of sticks, and all this contraption is tied well together with lianes, tropical vines. The pig is placed on this bed on its back, and the belly wide open, and kept in position with sticks to prevent it from closing up when the fire is lighted. Now, keep in mind, when you're doing proper bucan, you're doing it to preserve the meat. Yes, you could do it as a cooking method, as Labat's doing here. Typically, that's how I do it at events where we're not really preserving it, we just want to eat. Normally, based on the descriptions, you're cutting pieces of the meat and laying it across and drying it out. You're not usually putting a whole pig. While everyone was hard at work doing these things, the slaves set fire to a big heap of wood which they had cut the day before. When the wood was reduced to charcoal, the slaves put it under the pig, against all the rules to use any metal instruments, such as shovels or tongs or plates, dishes, spoons, or forks. Even tablecloths are forbidden, as they are too much at variance with buccaneer simplicity. Buccaneers would have used tools if they had them. Labat's going a little weird in this one. Like I said, it's somewhat anachronistic. I have forgotten to say that the belly of the pig must be filled with lime juice and plenty of salt and crushed pimento, Jamaica pepper, allspice. For though pork is excellent and more tender in America than in any other country, these additions are necessary to make it really succulent. I agree with Labat. While the pig was cooking, those who wished to do so ate some breakfast. They were also permitted to drink a shot, un coupe, of wine, provided that they drink it in a calabash, a gourd, without water. For buccaneers never pour water into their wine and drink either pure water or neat liquor. Again, Labat is exaggerating that practice. Part of the reason you would add water to your alcohol is so it's safe to drink. A lot of your a lot of the stories of there being alcohol added to water, it's not that much. The water and the citrus, it actually works as an antibacterial. So, yeah, you drink a lot of it, yeah, you're probably going to have a headache later. But for the purpose of hydration, it'd be a lot better than getting dysentery later. It is lawful to eat the dishes brought from the house for breakfast, but once the pig has been tasted, it is against buccaneer law to eat anything else. Since, however, there is no rule so strict that it does not allow some exception, some of the company are allowed to mix water with their wine. This is because, being still novices of the order of buccaneers, it would not be wise to enforce all the rigor of the law. On which point I wish to remark, en passant, how much more justice and good sense there is in this order than is some I could mention, in which the novices are expected to be more punctual and exact than the old members. Labat here really sounds, some of the, when people try to make up rules for pirates, this honestly, it sounds like Labat. And it's the same sort of mentality of, there are these people, these bucaniers, and Labat does the same sort of language in some of his other writing toward the indigenous cultures as well. Labat's a bit problematic, just putting this out here. He sees what people are doing, he just doesn't understand what they are doing. After breakfast, everyone did his share of work. Some went shooting, others collected balesier, cockaboo leaves, and ferns to make the tablecloth and napkins. Some looked after the pig to see it cook slowly, and that the gravy penetrated the meat. This operation is effected by pricking a pig with the point of a brochet, but care must be taken, however, not to stick the brochet through the skin and thus allow the gravy to fall in the fire. When the bucan was judged to be sufficiently cooked, the hunters were recalled by firing a couple shots, one after the other. This is according to the rule, for watches are not customary in buccaneer society. Depending on your region, yeah, they very much were, Labat. As the hunters arrived, their game was plucked and thrown in the pig's belly, or it was spitted and placed near the fire to roast. Hunters who brought nothing were not forgiven if they said that they had seen nothing, but were told that they must go back and shoot something or pay the last penalty. If they were old buccaneers, they were punished on the spot by having to drink as many shots, one after the other, as the most successful hunter had brought in birds. The only mercy that can be shown them, if it is proved that bad fortune and not carelessness has been the cause of their crime, is to give them the choice of the liquor that they have to drink. In the case of novices, for so those who assist in a bucan for the first time are called, their punishment depends on the master of the bucan. It is then his duty to impose a penalty with discretion and wisdom in proportion to the weakness of the sinners. After the Song of Creation, we sat down at a table so solid that nothing but an earthquake could have shaken it. For our table was the earth itself, covered with ferns and leaves. Each person laid beside him his two brochets, his knife and his calabash for drinking, and a cockaboo leaf. This cockaboo leaf is cut into a square, the four corners which are bent up and tied to each set with small lianes so as to make a bowl. It is in this bowl that one puts the gravy, which is made sweeter or piquant according to the taste. I had provided napkins and bread, though this is really contrary to the rules, for real buccaneers know not the meaning of napkins and use but baked plantains for bread. Plantains were used, but they did know what bread was and could get it would use it if they could get it. The master of the bucan, as head of the party, and father of the family, cuts the first helping for all the company. Armed with a large fork in his left hand and a great knife in his right, he approaches the pig, which lies on its peaceful bed over a small fire. He cuts big slices of pork without damaging the skin, and puts them in a balisier leaves, which the waiters carry to the guests. A large calabash full of gravy, and another full of lime juice, pepper, salt, and pimento stand in the center of the table. And from these each guest mixes his gravy according to his taste. When the first helping is finished, the older buccaneers get up and serve the others. Lastly, the novices carve the pig, and they should have learnt this art by watching their elders. I do not think it necessary to inform the reader that one of the essential things in a bucan is to drink frequently. The law compels it. The sauce invites one to do so, and few err this respect. But since man is frail and would often fail, had he no one to remind him of his duty and correct him, the master of the bucan has to watch his party. Should he find anyone idle or negligent, he must at once call everyone's attention to the fact. The delinquent must then do penance by drinking a large calabash, a no mean injury, since the calabash is always kept full of wine. In this harmless manner we spent the day with the greatest possible enjoyment. The good wine, which is the soul of the meal, never failed. I had imported it from France, Madeira, and Canary, and cooled as it had been in the river, anyone would have said that it was iced. Now, would buccaneers have celebrated this way? For the most part, yeah, there's no issue with it. There's little things here and there where I think Labat confuses field expedience with tradition. If you don't have a fork, yeah, use a sharpened stick. If you have a fork, use the fork. Should be noted that Labat is writing after 1694. The buccaneers that he is describing, they've already started to move into myth. Yes, some of them are still alive. The practice of bucan would have already been known. It would have already started spreading. But the traditions that he's trying to emulate more likely never existed. So it's important to note that. That said, what he describes is fairly consistent with if you're making food for that day. If you're preserving it, no, you wouldn't do it that way. You would have thinner pieces and you'd cook it a lot longer. This past weekend we had a Christmas celebration at Fort Loudon. We had nearly 1,000 people show up. It was a great time. I actually did make bucan. It was a great experience. If you ever want to come to an event at Fort Loudon, I mean, check our page, check Fort Loudon's page. There's a lot of events throughout the year. This coming year is almost completely booked. We have School of 17th Century Soldier in March. If you're very interested in this time period and want to participate or learn, feel free. Feel free to visit. If you're planning on staying and actually participating, there is a fee, and you will have certain levels of authenticity standards. This is set up as a event for newcomers into the hobby, and those of us who've been a while to network and hang out. We will probably have, in fact, I guarantee we are going to have 17th century sports games, so if you want to anger William Bradford, definitely, if you want to participate, let us know. As always, if you are looking for a source for clothing, things like that, feel free to hit us up. And if you're looking for a Krampus, I highly recommend Susquehanna Valley Krampus. So, take care. Have an awesome day.